as someone who goes around sort of giving talks and things, it's wonderful to be in an organization where you don't have to think. Other people are doing all the real hard work, and you just breeze in and do what you do. And Beverley was such an inspiration. She inspired me on so many occasions. I can just hear her laugh at the moment. She had this incredible, infectious, do you remember, Sam? You know, how she would burst out laughing, you know, and really make you feel relaxed. But behind that was a very sharp intellect. She was a very bright person. And she and I had many sort of private conversations, you know, over a cup of tea and things about matters deeper. And I learned a great deal from her. And it was a great sadness when we all learned that she had gone far too young. She did her master's degree and all that at Reading University. But she's, in the academic world, best known for her work at Brunel University in London, where she was responsible for really widening access to people, neurodiversity we now call it. That word wasn't used in those days, but people with disability, people from ethnic minorities. She was the champion of people, and she would visit schools and encourage them to go into higher education and say, don't be put off, you know, don't be prescribed by what you think about yourself, you know, have a go. And she would encourage so many people to go into education that wouldn't have really gone in. So an inspirational person at all sorts of levels, and a real advocate for the silent people. So Bev, we miss you very much, and we are delighted today that we honor your memory through this wonderful lecture given by another great friend of mine. And I always describe Bart McGettrick as one of the giants of values education in the world. I've sat on his shoulders many times, metaphorically speaking, and I've used his words of wisdom. I can't replicate his humor, which is unique, which you'll discover in a minute. But I've used much of what he said. In this room, many years ago, he used a phrase that so many people associate with me, but it's not my words, it was Bart's. I've said this in other conferences. He said, and we talked about education, didn't we, when we were talking about it. You were saying, Hannon, about education, what is education in different languages. Well, education, Bart said, is a conversation. It's a conversation between generations about matters of significance. What a beautiful thing. And I've latched onto that because that's what education is when we're talking and sharing ideas. Bart McGettrick, OBE, has been honored for his incredible contribution to education. In Scotland, at St Andrews, he ran really the teacher training for Scottish people and people from other countries that went up there to learn. And he made sure that his organization did deliver on values and a whole education for children, young people. He then went on to be really running the education in Glasgow University. And other than that, he's done so much, and he's known at the moment for his incredible work at Bethlehem University. And he was in the Middle East only a few days ago, really, and he's really tussling with all the ethical dilemmas that come along in that part of the world. But if people want to know more about you, they can go online, and there's so much written about your contribution. And we are deeply honored And I was so touched, Bart, that you didn't, as many esteemed speakers do, breeze in when it's your turn on the conference agenda. You came from the first moment of our weekend, and you've interacted with everybody. So we're deeply grateful to you. So may I now introduce Professor Bart McGettrick, our friend Bart, who will now talk to us. Thank you, Bart.
For that very generous introduction. And now, when I'm giving a talk, I usually confess to audiences that I pray every day that I will die during a lecture on values education, so that the transition from life to death will be totally imperceptible. Now, I haven't planned to die through this lecture. If I do, my apologies in advance. I'm not sure that you'll notice. But what I should say is what an honor it is to give the lecture on the named lecture for Beverley. And I think I just want to spend a moment just in silence. Slight music just to reflect for half a minute or thereabouts on a dear friend. Because Neil has given a very moving comment on the work of Beverley, and I met her in this house some years ago, and what struck me about her was that she was one of these people who saw the treasures of the world in the eyes of everyone that she met. I think of her spirit now, looking on this assembly, probably wondering about how we wrestle with a world where we struggle to accept refugees in this country, why we still have the poor and hungry children in this country, why our televisions are filled with war and destruction, why in Tel Aviv and places like that there are still baby warehouses where there are babies stacked up on shelves. Why we have the politicians who seem to treat people as statistics and not as people with a history and with a humanity. And why we're not dealing with some of these issues. And the people in this room, inspired as you are by the values of such goodness, why we're not living in a better world. And I suppose one finishes by thinking that Bev knew that we can't do everything, but we shouldn't do nothing. One could go on talking about Bev, and as Neil has said, her work latterly particularly was at Brunel University and the Widening Partnership Officer. And there was an obituary written about her, and I just want to, I think, to quote from this because it says a great deal about her. And I'll just read this. I know this is bad practice pedagogically, but the obituary published by her colleagues at Brunel said, "We're extremely sad to share the news of the death of our much loved and respected colleague, Dr. Beverley Crooks, who passed away after suddenly becoming ill on Tuesday." With the concept of widening participation in its infancy when she joined Brunel, Beverley had carte blanche to think and continue to think of new ways to make it possible for people to not just get into university, but to get on once they're there and when they leave. On campus, Beverley ran a peace of mind meditation class each week based on the Eastern philosophy and teachings of the Brahma Kumaris. She was a vegetarian and very much centered in her belief, which she kept private but practiced daily. In the office, she was a treasured, inspirational and generous colleague with time for everyone, relentlessly positive, a great listener, as well as being plain good fun. At home, she was a devoted partner and aunt, and very proud of her large extended family. And so the obituary goes on. Gives a sense of who she was, what she was like. But I suppose I'm convinced that if Bev was listening to a lecture in her name, she wouldn't want it based on an obituary. What she would want is somehow to see how we can better support people in flourishing in the future. And I suppose what I will try to do in the course of these next few minutes is outline what some of those issues might be for the future. And let me say at the outset, talking about the future of education, it seems to me almost futile to predict what that future is going to look like and what education will be like in the future. But I want to think for some moments on the relationship between values and artificial intelligence, a topic that's on everyone's lips or mind, wondering what it really means. And perhaps more accurately, I want to reflect on the futility of thinking of education as a technology-driven endeavour. Let me just define artificial intelligence for a moment. And I'll define it very broadly as the application of computerized systems and techniques which achieve capabilities in a wide variety of environments. So it's the application of computerized systems. It's increasingly commonly used in fields of medicine and engineering, in the arts and the media. And I use the term to contrast artificial intelligence with what might be described as biological intelligence, however you want to define biological intelligence. It includes human intelligence, but it may well include other things as well. So my starting point is to say I want to talk about the computerized systems and what we're doing. But before doing that, let me just comment about what I see as a sort of philosophy or view of education. For me, increasingly, I think education requires an open heart. Now, we've spoken of that yesterday at some length. But if you don't have an open heart, how are you to be educated? That seems to me to be a kind of fundamental. And for me, the human characteristics that we need in terms of educating people are threefold. One is you need an open heart. That openness to change, openness to new ideas, openness to the other. Always thinking of the other, not the self. we need curiosity and inquisitiveness. The educated person is infinitely curious about things, a mind that is searching and curious and so on. And I think we need to be developing this with positive, right relationships. And to me, education is about the conversation from generation to generation about matters of significance. It's a lifelong process. And it's based on values, and values are developed in relationships. Let me say in right relationships, because people can have wrong relationships. People can have very negative relationships. We have got to look at an education that is about right relationships. And one of the things I want to just reflect on, having listened to so much yesterday about this, my view is that what people are doing in educational organizations or institutions is developing communities of hope and avoiding the prevalent culture of developing organizations of effectiveness and efficiency. You can look at a school in two ways. You can look at a school or a university or an organization as an organization, a structure. And if you look at it like that, you'll say we need a good structure. We need to make sure that that structure is efficient, effective, uses its resources and all of that kind of thing. You can look at it and decide how the institution is going to develop. Or you can say, no, that's not the model I want. I want this to be a community of hope, a community of love, a community of justice. And you look at it with a very different lens when you think of a school or a college or a university as a community. And for me, developing a community of hope. And what I see happening so often is that schools and public education is driven by this notion of an organization. Beware of the tyranny of measurement, because if you go down that route of looking at organizations, then you'll measure things. But how do you measure hope and love and justice? You're in the wrong environment. So for me, this issue of how you see a school as a community is at the heart of a values-driven education system. Seeing it as a community of hope, and seeing it as a community where there is not an excessive structure. That sounds like an odd thing to say. Beware of the tyranny of measurement and having too much structure. Forgive me if I seem to be critical of English education, but I could start for the next hour and a half. But the one thing that I think is damaging is there is too much structure. There is actually too much structure. Now, I'm a simple-minded guy. When I think of structure and organizations, the metaphor that I use is an egg. An egg is there to develop a chicken, let's say, for the future. That's why we have eggs. It's for developing the future. And there are two parts, showing my insight into biology. There's two parts to an egg. One is the inside and the other is the outside. That's all you need to know. The outside is the shell, and the inside is the yolk. Thinking of this shell as what protects it, what gives structure to it, if that shell is too thin, the chicken will break out before it's properly formed and will die. But if the shell is too thick, it won't be able to break out at all, and it will die. So there's a very interesting relationship between structure and creativity. In my view, the shell of English education is too thick, and it's suffocating creativity, innovation, and change. What we need is less structure, but enough structure. You can't go without structure. You should not try to develop an organization without structure, but get the right structure. And that is, I think, an important issue of looking at a school or an institution with enough structure to allow creativity. And my sense of English education at the moment, and education in many countries, I wouldn't exclude Scotland from these remarks, has too much structure, too much external structure that is potentially suffocating. So let me just turn now to artificial intelligence, because many people would take the view that the advance of artificial intelligence will lead to a kind of de-skilling. The advance of computer systems, less handwriting, less numeracy skills, perhaps less conversations, because you have conversations only with the computer, with computerized systems, less creativity, less inquiring minds. So are we going into an environment with artificial intelligence where we are de-skilling people in these kinds of areas? Or, I think perhaps what we need to be doing is looking at reskilling people, not allowing a de-skilling process, but what are the new skills that we require? We need skills to tell fantasy from reality. There are significant advantages, of course, in artificial intelligence in areas like medicine and science and engineering, the arts and so on. And sometimes we find now in the arts there are simulations of pop groups done totally with artificial figures. And you can't tell the difference between that and reality. In London at the moment, I think there's a show by ABBA that is entirely done by artificial intelligence. And people who attend it, I'm not one of them, but people who attend it say, you can't tell the difference.
It's weird though, you kind of forget. At first you're like, it's weird, and then you forget.
You forget it, yeah. So that the issue of entertainment and, you know, can you tell truth from fantasy, I suppose, is the question there. So artificial intelligence is advancing, and we're not going to be able to stop it. We won't stop it, but can we use it? I think that one of the things that I would want to see is that in education, we are forming people in a society that pursues truth, honesty, integrity, respect for others, compassion, resilience, and love of our fellow human beings, and stewardship of the environment. That's where we have to continue to see the educated person being developed and formed with these values at the heart. So in a world of increased uncertainty, and I use that very poignantly to say, you know, if I'm looking to the world, I think it's a world of increased uncertainty. How can we best use some of the digital developments to support the care of the minds and the souls of our students? How are we to do that in a world of uncertainty? And I speak of a world of uncertainty because I think in certain respects, we're in a post-truth society. What is truth? And whose truth are we talking about? Are we talking about the truth that comes from the media? Are we talking about the truth that comes from our fellow human beings? Whose truth are we talking about? And that's all. 20 years ago, that might have been an absurd question. Truth is truth. Now you can ask the question, whose truth are we talking about? Because truth is not a commodity to be bought and sold in curriculum development rooms or senates of universities. I get into difficulty in Glasgow University Senate on one occasion when I was critical of faculty of medicine getting a grant in the relationship between tobacco and cancer. And they got a huge grant. Why did they get the grant? Presumably because they knew what the outcome of the research was going to be. It was from a tobacco company. And I asked the question, is truth now a commodity bought and sold in our universities and other places? Or is truth something beyond that? And clearly it's something beyond that. And for me, truth is that human quality that is the blood flowing through the educated heart. With some of the developments in artificial intelligence, of course, what we're looking at are huge changes that are happening very quickly. I mean, the pace of change in artificial intelligence is very difficult to keep up with because you're dealing with tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of websites interacting with each other, developing each other, creating new knowledge from each other, talking to each other, and so on. And so the change is very, very rapid. And there are areas like ChatGPT, ChatGPT-4, which is a phenomenal piece of software. I don't know if any of you use it on a regular basis. Well, let me tell you, when I was asked to give this talk, I thought, well, I wonder what ChatGPT-4 would give us a lecture on artificial intelligence and values. This isn't it. But what I put into the ChatGPT-4, and forgive the arrogance of this, but I put in the question something like, as a professor of education giving a talk for 45 minutes on values and artificial intelligence, please give me a lecture. Within 10 seconds, I had 8 pages telling me what to say for the first 3 or 4 minutes, what to say for the next 15 minutes, what to say in the next 15 minutes. The lecture was all there. I only used one part of it, and that was the definition of artificial intelligence, which I thought was good. The rest of it was not what I thought I would say about values and But it was good, it was interesting, it was certainly very interesting. And the question would arise, would you ever use that in terms of giving a lecture to your students or to your fellow human beings and so on? It's a very good starting point. It's a wonderful starting point. And if I was teaching in a university now, and thank God I'm not, I would probably encourage students to use it. But what I would also do is encourage them to be reflective of what it's saying and to reflect on it and to think about it and so on. Because especially, I suppose, for undergraduate students, it would be a very useful starting point in giving you some ideas. So I'm not by any means dismissive of it. I just think one has got to be very careful about how you use it. And that, of course, takes us back to some of these things about the inquiring mind. You would like to think the inquiring mind would read some of that material, reflect on it and say, well, that's quite interesting, but I've got other views and so on, and be confident in having one's own views. But it's here to stay, and it's not going to go away. And I think people in schools, and maybe particularly in universities, are going to have to come to terms with the nature of this product that comes from artificial intelligence. Because what this document has done is it has scanned maybe 80,000 websites in a matter of a second or 2 seconds. It has scanned all of this and then produced this material. Hugely impressive in many, many ways. Is there then a fear? Are we afraid that we're losing control of the curriculum and of what children are learning? Now, in my view, I should say, I think the curriculum is an outmoded concept. Curriculum is going to disappear. And I think already it's an outmoded concept. And the only reason it remains so strong in the English education system is because there's too much structure from government that keeps it there. But ultimately, that is not going to be helpful to your students who need to be more creative, who need to be exposed to other ideas. So, are we losing control? Well, did we ever have control of what people learned? We shouldn't think in terms of control. But the next generations are going to be exposed to values which might be damaging to the common good. One of the things I think we need to be talking about all the time is what is in the common good? What is there in the common good? Not in the individual good, but the common good. And I think that's an important part of developing artificial intelligence, where we are not looking at individual good, but looking at the ethical issues associated with the common good. What is in the interests of all of us? And in a world of rapid change, I think one of the features is the emergence of the ChatGPT, and it's going to be a game changer, no question about it. It's going to change the way in which people learn and teachers teach. The question is, in what ways is it going to change? This is an awful lot of reading. Basically what I'm saying here is, I think what's going to happen is there's going to be a kind of emerging ecology of pedagogy, a coming together, a wholeness of pedagogies, different ways of thinking, bringing them together in the interests of the individual student. And so what artificial intelligence will do is allow that integration to take place in a much easier kind of way. But it seems to me that artificial intelligence will allow a kind of emerging ecology of ways of teaching and learning, where there's interrelationship across systems in ways that we haven't been able to develop up until now. And I suppose I see these changes as, generally speaking, being for the good, but the values, or the challenge rather, is to keep values at the heart of it. As long as we keep the values at the heart of what we're doing, then I wouldn't be fearful of the onward progress of artificial intelligence. Because education is not technology-driven. To me, technology is important, but technology is fragile. All technologies are fragile and changing and moving. It's not the heart of education. It's a means of developing forms of education. I happen to be a friend of the person who developed the chip and pin. He lives in the Glasgow area. And I was talking to him about developing university curricula, and I had got to the point of saying, if I'm now looking to the future, I wonder whether, if you look to the universities, that it's all going to be based on technology. So when you teach nurses, is effectively looking at how technology is affecting nursing. When you're looking at social work, how's technology enhancing that? How's teaching, engineers, scientists, and so on? It all is moving towards technological-driven education. And he said, beware. Technology is fragile. Don't ever develop your education around technology, because it will change, it will fracture, the lights will go out, you won't have the electricity. Beware of a technological-driven education system. And so the idea of computerized systems, the artificial intelligence, is a dangerous road to go down if you see that as the heart of education, because it's not. It's not the heart. It's something different from that. It's artificial. And I'm not wanting to stop technology in any shape or form. I see that as a very important kind of development. And it's not just a matter of avoiding the fake news and pursuing truth at all costs. It's a matter of enhancing and supporting authentic relationships. I understand there may be people who are listening to this online at the moment. People, and welcome. I'm glad people are looking at it online. But the experience of people online is very different from the experience of being here. When you look at the authentic relationships, when you look at the eyes, you look at the smiling eyes, and I look at the smiling eyes here, and I see 87 smiling eyes. There's always someone with the one eye. If you want to come up and see if you can decide who it is that's got a glass eye. But if you look at the smiling eyes, then that is a very different experience from online learning. It's the authentic relationships that actually are very educative. Having said that, I hope that people who are looking at it online are not switching it off at this point. So my view is that we need to continue to see technology develop, but don't think it's a substitute for human relationships, particularly an education which is values-based. It's often said that, of course, the technology is values neutral. I wonder if that's true. I wonder if technology is values neutral, because it benefits those, first of all, who have access to the technology. That itself is a value issue. The people who can access the technology. And I think we need to think about, not just about people losing their jobs and that kind of thing, but looking at continuing to have authentic relationships. I mentioned at the beginning the importance of right relationships, and I think that is vitally important. And I think that we need to look at how we're using artificial intelligence for the good of humanity. Because sometimes, sadly, people will use artificial intelligence not for the good of humanity, but for damaging humanity. And I say that passionately at the moment with what's happening in the Middle East, the way in which wars develop and way in which fake news is given and who's telling the truth when a hospital is blown up, who has done it, and all of that kind of thing. So, I mean, I speak with a sad heart about the way in which technology is used to damage, in a damaging way, not always with the enhancement of the love and care that we would want to see. I think I've come to a view in my own thinking about education that there are only three things worth talking about in education. One is hope, one is love, and one is justice. So let me just reflect on the question of hope, because hope is a very significant part of the human condition. Hope keeps us alive. Let me just give you a little story about that. I have a former colleague who's the Chief Medical Officer for Scotland. And he is a doctor, and before he became the Chief Medical Officer, he worked in hospitals. And he worked in a hospital in the East End of Glasgow and then in the West End of Glasgow. And broadly speaking, the East End of Glasgow is a poor area, West End of Glasgow is a rather wealthy area. And there's about 15 miles between them. And Harry moved from the hospital in the east to the west. And what he was intrigued by was that when he did an operation in the West End of Glasgow, people healed up much more quickly than in the East End of Glasgow. And then when he became Chief Medical Officer, what he did was he looked at life expectancy. Life expectancy for a man in the West End of Glasgow is 83 years of age. West End, affluent area, 83 years of age. East End of Glasgow, 67. Question, why is there such a difference? So he decided he would try to investigate, and of course he looked at things like the amount of smoking, alcohol consumption, diet, all of these sorts of things. None of these things explained life expectancy of that magnitude. He concluded that the problem was that when people die, and doctors give indication of why they have died, it's always a scientific explanation. They've died of a cancer or lung problems or some ailment or other. What they should be writing on the death certificate is, this person died 15 years prematurely because they had no hope. It's a question of not looking in the right place. It's not just a scientific issue. It's looking at people who have hope. Now, if you go into old people's homes and things like that, you can tell places of hope and places of no hope. And it's the imperative part of our life that makes us hopeful. So hope is not just a good idea. It's the lifeblood that keeps you alive. And so, for me, teaching is the ministry of hope in the service of the young. It's what is giving future generations life and hope. There is nothing more important than hope, and we cannot live in a hopeless society. We can't live in a hopeless society because that is where problems are going to arise. And values education surely is based on an idea of hope. And the work that Bev has done in widening partnerships was an illustration of that hopefulness. It's one of the ways in which enlightened universities create hope and create hope for generations yet to come. And Bev would have been a very good example of that hopefulness. Love. As I say, much of my work now is done in Palestine and the Middle East. And what I witness there is some desperate situations. The baby warehouses of Tel Aviv, I could talk to you endlessly about that. These are places where refugees come and they come with their children. They have to find places where they can leave their children while they do the most menial jobs. And so they stack them in shelves in a house or whatever. And then they go to work and they come back. And these baby warehouses are desperate places of children who are less than 1 year old, lying in silence because they've learned not to cry. Doesn't do them any good, it just uses energy. And these are desperate places. Even worse than that are some of the refugee places in northern Jordan that I was in about 3 weeks ago now, talking to families who are prepared to sell the eyes of their children to get money to feed the rest of the family. Who are the doctors that are prepared to undertake those operations? People selling the eyes of their children. I mean, it's beyond human description. And that is happening in areas. And across the world, there is a huge trade in organ movement. And, you know, one shouldn't ignore that. I mean, and when you come across it, it is the most desperate thing, trying to say to people, look, don't do it. I'll get you money. I'll get you money. That's what I try to do in northern Jordan and parts of Israel as well, the eastern part of Israel. These are just awful situations. But what it does for me is, it says, you know, to be human is just to love others. To love others and to have a compassion and a feeling of wanting to do what you can to help other people. And when looking at some of these desperate cases, I mean, I've come to the view that the people in these refugee camps, the people in the baby warehouses, these are the treasures of our time. These aren't the people to be cast aside or to be ignored or to be put to one side. These are the treasures of our time, and we should do what we can to treasure them, to make sure that they are treated like our sons or daughters or grandchildren or whatever. That seems to me to be what we are called to do in a values-enlightened education. That we are trying to make sure that these people are the treasures of our lives. And of course, equally, one just despairs of the mindless carnage that can be brought to these places by politicians who frankly don't know, and sometimes I think don't care what's happening to the thousands, the tens of thousands of people who are affected by some of their decisions. So this idea of using artificial intelligence to enhance a loving society seems to me to be what we should be about. And surely there is a simplicity in saying, surely we can educate people for love. It sounds simple, but my goodness, when you look at the world we live in, sometimes it's difficult. And with regard to justice, I mean, I struggle sometimes with the dilemma, what's the higher order virtue, truth or justice? Discuss. For me, we should never compromise on truth, however uncomfortable it is. Never compromise on truth. We should seek a world of human rights, and that is a world that will bring justice. And I take the view that was expressed yesterday. Seek a world of justice, and it will lead to peace. Justice you can do something about. Peace is a gift. And so I would urge people who have an interest in values to pursue the issue mainly of justice, and through that it will lead to a world of peace. So can artificial intelligence influence any of that? I think in a values-enlightened environment, yes, it can affect love and hope and justice. But we're living in a world of politics. And with the politics that I hear about, I think it has often trivialized the pursuit of virtue rather than guaranteed the common good. And it seems to me we have to pursue the common good. So let not the voice of goodness and virtue grow hoarse with old age. Don't be hoarse when talking about virtue and goodness, or have it dimmed by the clatter of the noise that goes on round about. We will serve our students well, and we don't know how we will serve them, but what we do know is this, that the greatest human need is to reconcile the pain of contemporary living with the hope of a future where there is a spirit of virtue and goodness. Reconcile the pain of the present with the hope of the future. That's what we have to do in a values-enlightened education. As I see it, there are too many rivers that are rivers of hardship and misery that are filling lakes of despair. That's what's creating lakes of despair. And for me, a values-inspired curriculum must be a fresh spring of water that is bringing lightness and a sense of hope, feeding the plains of justice. So let the spring of hope flow freely, because that's what Bev Crooks would have wanted. The spring of fresh water of values education, making a better world. And may she rest in peace.